It's generally the consensus that what academics believe has a certain amount of credibility by sheer virtue of them being an academic. And it's also generally the consensus that education is important. However, what counts as education and academia are rarely elaborated upon, and to a large degree, both concepts have a lot of false authority as far as I can tell. This is why I think it's important for us to take a more critical look at academia and the motivations behind a lot of it. After all, if the motivations behind academia were grounded in broadening our understanding, it would seem logical that they would encourage open-mindedness and a free and open exchange of ideas. But with this clearly not being the case in many academic circles, I think we need to look at academia a little more skeptically. To do this, I'll start with a brief historical analysis, and it's one that I'm surprised I don't hear more people mention. What I'm talking about is the age-old practice of wishing to make a specific ideological doctrine of morality the culturally accepted norm. Throughout history, religion was the most popular and perhaps the most effective way of doing this, by means of regulating human behavior and silencing dissenting viewpoints. Today is no different, it's just that the dogma in question has changed. The clergy has been replaced by academia, the pontiff has been replaced by the university professor, and the pulpit has been replaced by the PowerPoint presentation. What was once known as a service may now be known as a seminar, but in truth, if you swap the references to supernatural deities with references towards equality and diversity, the institutions are practically interchangeable. The premises held by gender studies students today are just as faith-based as the premises held by the theocratic crusaders that came before them, and questioning their moral beliefs will provoke the same indignation. Those who dissent from their worldview may no longer be labelled as heretics, but the word heretic has not been done away with. It's just been replaced by words such as misogynist, bigot, and xenophobe. And whilst there were once such things as blasphemy laws to deal with the heretics, today, in many regions, we have hate speech laws instead, which are basically the same thing. Speech which is deemed immoral by the dominant ideological narrative is deemed to warrant direct action in order to discourage it, regardless of what freedoms those who fall outside of such a worldview are denied as a result. Whilst many people like to convince themselves that modernity is a paragon of enlightenment, in reality, with moralistic ideologies such as feminism colluding with the state, as well as with numerous multinational corporations, to limit their opponent's narrative from gaining traction, we are living in little more than a modern-day theocracy, and as one of the modern-day heretics, I have gradually grown very sceptical towards much of modern academia as a result. To me, academia should consist of a wide selection of institutions which are dedicated to discerning truth in different areas of study, although the extent that they are doing this in reality clearly depends upon the area of study in question. With hard sciences such as physics and chemistry, for example, ideological biases affecting the outcome of the research are likely very slim, if present at all, and this is because the hard sciences are grounded in objectivity and empiricism. It doesn't matter to the researchers what the outcome of the research is, because the only motivation to the research itself is the desire to find out more. With social sciences, however, the human element to the research makes bias difficult to remove, and with evolution prioritizing the survival of the female, it can be inferred that much of the social science which focuses upon gender will reflect a certain level of gynocentrism, and therefore we have a conflict of interest within many of these academic circles. On the one hand, academia should ideally reflect objectivity and empiricism, but on the other, looking at the socio-economic relationship between men and women from a different angle might posit some inconvenient truths for the adherents of the gender studies narrative. Because the truth is, there's a reason why men earn more money than women on average. And there's a reason why men generally hold the most political power too, at least directly speaking. And it's because men are clearly more willing to do things that women generally are not. To illustrate this, I can simply point to the fact that the jobs which are the most dangerous, the jobs which require the most leadership responsibility, and the jobs which are the most physically demanding, are predominantly populated by men. Whilst feminists may claim this is because of women being denied opportunities, the evidence doesn't support it, and neither does the economic logic. Economically speaking, it makes no sense for an employer to discriminate based upon factors that are immaterial to the skills and qualifications that a person needs in order to perform a job that the employer is advertising. If institutional discrimination were as bad as the feminists say it is, women could simply use this to their economic advantage, and I'll now explain how. If women genuinely commanded a lower salary than men for the same work, they could embrace this fact and offer to work for less. This would not only make women more employable and more promotable in the workplace, but it would also negatively affect the employers that chose to discriminate against women. After all, the employers who chose to employ and promote men over women would be doing so at a financial cost. And if there really wasn't any difference in skills between men and women, that extra cost would give them absolutely no benefit whatsoever. But in reality, the skills between men and women are not the same, and this is why pay disparity exists. Of course, you likely won't hear a gender studies professor concede this, but that's because one can infer a clear conflict of interest between discerning the truth behind the pay gap and wanting the pay gap to disappear for selfish reasons. It is for this reason that I think much of academia ought to be boycotted. Whilst we could always attempt to reform such academic institutions from the inside out by injecting some basic common sense, this would be tactically very difficult given the vehemence and sheer head count of our opposition, as well as the methods of which their narrative is clearly controlled. Therefore, it would seem obvious to me that a more productive use of our time would be to simply discredit such institutions from the outside by highlighting their clear conflict of interest, and the inaccuracy of many of their studies. Of course, academia is a great concept, but if it's not approached skeptically, you could end up getting into a lot of debt with a degree that really wasn't worth your time. Not to mention the fact that the academics you paid handsomely through your course fees will simply use that monetary incentive to perpetuate yet more bad ideas which will have nothing but a negative effect upon society at large, and a negative effect upon the minds of the next generation. If you are thinking of going to university, I suggest you study something relevant to science, engineering, mathematics, technology, medical science, or perhaps something to do with economics and finance. That way, you'll have a good degree which has practical utility, and you'll be funding academic institutions which truly care about the facts. Thanks for watching.